Stonefield had only two seasons, busy season and whispering season. This small valley town never truly slept, there was always something to gossip about. Whether in the barber shop, the church pews, or at the lone grocery store checkout. 7 years ago, the name Hannah Rivers was at the center of it all. And now, as a black Range Rover pulled up in front of Town Hall, the whispers began again. She's back, isn't she? The woman who stepped out wore a camel-colored coat, high-collared and clean-cut. Her boots clicked against the pavement. In one hand, she held the small hand of a boy, around 6 years old, with deep brown eyes and hair the color of late summer bark. Her face hadn't changed much, still sharp-jawed, lips pressed in calm defiance, and eyes that made people stop asking unnecessary questions. Hannah Rivers was home, and this time, no one had the right to throw her out. She didn't go to her old house. She didn't stop by the church. She drove straight to the temporary office of the town's legal representative, where she knew, without doubt, her father had signed the bankruptcy declaration just weeks earlier. She didn't knock, she walked in, because now, there were no doors closed to her. And if there were, she'd already learned how to build her own. The receptionist looked startled, mouth halfway through forming her name. Hannah handed her a business card. Hannah Rivers, founder and CEO. Jamie's Table Corp. Is my father in? Her voice was quiet, but sharp as steel wire. 3 hours earlier, she had been on stage in Chicago, accepting a Women in Business award. Flashbulbs burst, champagne popped, strangers cheered. Then her phone buzzed. Rachel. She hadn't seen her sister's name in years. The message was short. Dad's under investigation. The house is being seized. Mom hasn't eaten in days. They said, if you still have any decency left, come home. Hannah read the message twice. Then she laughed. Not cruelly, just sharply, like a blade glinting in sunlight. Now, she sat across from Paul Rivers, the man who had thrown her out of his house when she was 17 and pregnant. The man who once spat the words, "You're not my daughter anymore." He looked smaller now, not from age, but from the loss of control, of power. He opened his mouth. She raised her hand. No, don't start with, "I'm sorry. You haven't been my father for 7 years. Save those words for God. If you're still on speaking terms." The room was quiet. He exhaled. That night, I only wanted to protect the family. Our name. And what was I? Hannah tilted her head. A stain? Garbage? A price too high to keep? Silence. She leaned back, arms crossed. Now the family's reputation is ashes. Your assets are gone. And your daughter, the one you disowned, is the only person who can buy back the house before the bank locks it down. She paused, watching the weight of her words land. The girl you cast out is the one holding the last key. Jamie was waiting in the car outside, sketchbook in hand, drawing clouds like he always did when things felt quiet. Hannah looked at him through the window. She wasn't here to reopen wounds. She was here to close the chapter. On her terms. It was raining when Hannah Rivers found out she was pregnant. Not the violent kind of rain, more like a quiet drizzle that soaks deep into the bones. Lingering like a sad soundtrack to a film you never asked to star in. She stood in the bathroom, staring at the test strip, gripping it so tightly her knuckles whitened. That second pink line appeared as clearly as a fresh scar, unmistakable. Irreversible. 17 years old, honor roll student, daughter of Paul Rivers, chairman of the church board, community leader, Stonefield's moral compass, and now, pregnant by Ethan Brooks, the mechanic's son from the rougher side of town, who drove a battered pickup that rattled like a kettle about to blow. Hannah had never imagined she'd break every expectation so completely. When she told Ethan, he was silent for only a second. Then he took her hands. "We'll be okay," he said. "I'll work full-time. We can rent a small place. If you want to keep the baby, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time since the test turned pink, Hannah cried. Not out of fear, but because someone chose to stand beside her, just as the world was getting ready to shut its doors. That evening, she stood in the kitchen, heart pounding louder than the rain on the roof. Her father was reading the Stonefield Weekly. Her mother was chopping celery for chicken soup. Everything looked normal, but something inside Hannah was already breaking free from what normal had always meant. I need to talk to you, she said. Her father lowered the paper. Her mother didn't look up. I'm pregnant, she said, voice trembling but firm, and I want to keep the baby. There was silence for 5 seconds. On the 6th, the chopping knife slipped, and a dish clattered into the sink. On the 7th, Paul Rivers stood so violently. His chair fell backward. What did you say? I said. Shut your mouth, he roared. The kitchen, once filled with prayers and polite conversation, became a courtroom of rage. Her mother froze, the knife still in her hand. It was him, wasn't it? Her father spat. That grease-stained boy from the garage? You'd throw away everything we've built for a dropout? He's not. No, I don't want excuses. He slapped his palm on the table. Papers flew. A fundraising form soaked up spilled water and bled blue ink. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Our name, our respectability, ruined. Dad, go upstairs. Pack your things. I won't have a whore with a bastard baby under my roof. She turned to her mother. Desperation rising like floodwater. Mama, please? Miriam Rivers didn't move. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Only her hands, still holding the celery, kept moving. Chop, chop, chop. Mechanical, hollow. That night, Hannah stuffed a worn suitcase with a few changes of clothes, her journal, and the last remnants of a name that had been slowly unraveling. No one followed her. No one said goodbye. When she turned back at the gate, she saw the porch light still on and her mother's silhouette in the kitchen window, motionless. She didn't cry. She only tightened her grip on the suitcase and whispered to the storm. You were not left out. I was. She didn't know where she'd sleep. She didn't know how she'd survive. All she knew was this: the child inside her was the only one who hadn't turned away. The wind in Stonefield that night carried the smell of metal from the old lumber mill and the sting of cold that crept beneath jackets like a dull blade. Hannah stood on the curb with a torn suitcase in one hand and a hollow ringing in her chest. Streetlights flickered through the mist and tears, though she refused to cry more than 3 times in a row. Every drop, she believed, shaved off a layer of dignity, and she had already lost too much. No friends, no roof, nowhere she could safely call home. She reached for her phone with shaking hands. Ethan, her heart thudded. He would come if she called. She knew that, but what could he do? Bring her to the tiny attic room above the auto shop, with no heat and no door that locked? She didn't want her child to begin life dependent. Not on a boy, not on anyone. She shoved the phone back into her coat pocket and started walking. The town bus station was the only place still lit this late. The waiting room was cracked linoleum and a humming heater that sputtered every few seconds. Flyers peeled off the walls. Caregiver needed. Homemade bread. Cheap. Bible study group for girls. She sat on the plastic bench and clutched her bag to her chest. Her body ached. A dull cramp curled in her lower belly like a whisper from the tiny life inside her. I'm here. I'm real. Don't give up. Across the street, a bell chimed faintly. The neon, open, sign still glowed in the window of a corner store, Rose's Market. Hannah crossed the street, heart thudding harder with each step. She pushed the door open carefully. Inside, the sharp scent of cinnamon and aging wood greeted her. An older Latina woman was stacking shelves behind the counter. Her gray-streaked hair was pinned up in a loose bun, and her eyes, piercing but not unkind, landed on Hannah immediately. Hola, sweetheart, the woman said, voice low and gravelly with time. You lost? I just needed somewhere warm. Hannah replied, I'll leave right away. The woman looked her over. Not judgmentally, just deeply. Reading Hannah like a worn book with pages missing. You eaten? Hannah shook her head. I don't have any money. Without a word, the woman disappeared behind the counter and returned with a bowl of warm stew and a buttered bread roll. Sit, she said. Eat first. We talk after. 30 minutes later, Hannah had told her everything. Not in desperation. Not even for pity. Just because she couldn't carry the weight in silence anymore. She told her about the test. The door slammed shut. Her mother's silence. Ethan's voice asking her to stay. And how none of it had been enough to stop the free fall. The woman, Rosa, as Hannah soon learned, listened without interruption. Only occasionally. She'd stir her tea or glance toward the back room, where an ancient bread oven hummed like a sleeping dragon. You don't need all the answers right now, Rosa finally said. You just need somewhere not to freeze. She pointed toward the wooden stairs behind the shelves. Room upstairs, old but warm, not free, but cheaper than anything else in town. I can work for it, Hannah said immediately. Stock shelves, sweep floors, evening shift. Rosa eyed her. You bake? A little, but I learn fast. Rosa nodded. 5 a.m. start. Dough needs time to rise. That first night away from home, Hannah slept in a crooked attic room that smelled of old wood and yeast. The floor creaked, the radiator clanked, but there was a roof, a door, a woman downstairs who'd given her soup instead of sermons. She curled on the narrow bed and pressed a hand to her stomach. You won't grow up the way I did, she whispered. You'll know what it's like to be chosen. She closed her eyes. Sleep came, not deep, but real, and sometimes, that was enough. At 5 o'clock the next morning, when the alarm blared in her attic room like a trumpet for the battle ahead, she sat up instantly, breath sharp. She had somewhere to be. Her first day began with a flour-stained apron and a bowl of pre-risen dough from the night before. Rosa handed her a spiral-bound notebook, the pages stained with butter and thyme. In purple ink, the first sentence read, "Pastry is forgiveness you can eat." It was circled 3 times. Cinnamon rolls, Rosa said, slicing butter with swift precision. The only thing that makes a man buy flowers after a fight. Hannah laughed, just a small, tired laugh, but genuine, like a pilot light rekindled under a stove that had gone cold. She learned to bloom yeast, knead dough, monitor temperature, fold towels over bowls like wrapping fragile hope. Her hands were clumsy, but her eyes learned fast. Rosa didn't praise or scold. She just let Hannah find her own rhythm. When the first tray of cinnamon rolls came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Hannah stared at them in awe. Try one, Rosa said. Hannah picked up a warm roll, cradling it like something sacred. She thought of Jamie. That afternoon, Rosa handed her a $20 bill and a handwritten note. This is for the baking, not pity. Hannah folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. No one had ever believed in her value quite like that. The days became a rhythm. Mornings in the kitchen, afternoons sweeping the aisles, evenings spent watching online business classes on her cracked phone. One afternoon, as Hannah slumped against the counter, after a failed batch of burnt biscuits, Rosa sat beside her with 2 mugs of ginger tea. You know, Rosa said, blowing on the steam, bread is the only thing you have to punch before it turns out right. Hannah looked over, sweat clinging to her forehead. Feels true for everything else, too. Rosa nodded, setting her mug down and touching Hannah's shoulder. Don't fear needing it again. Life doesn't burn you if you learn to control the oven. Spring crept into Stonefield slowly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. But inside Rosa's market, Hannah's brioche dough had risen tall and golden, filling the kitchen with warmth that felt more emotional than physical. You did it, Rosa said, eyeing the loaf. No more underbaking, no more burnt bottoms. Hannah smiled. A small one, but real. That oven's less intimidating than judgment. Rosa looked at her carefully. Ever think about opening your own place? Hannah blinked. The idea wasn't foreign, but until now, it had felt forbidden. I haven't let myself think that far, she admitted. Then start with 1 step forward, Rosa said, and handed her a grease-stained notebook. Write your first recipe. One day, this book will be yours. That night, Hannah sat in her attic room, hand on her belly, heart thudding faster than usual. On a blank page, she wrote, Jamie's table, where everything begins again. From that moment, she worked differently. She studied late, learned about permits and pricing, took pictures of her best bakes, started an Instagram account. Customers began asking, "Where's your shop?" Soon, the question didn't scare her. One Sunday, Rosa gave her an envelope. $5,000, for your first oven, your first sign, doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be yours. Hannah teared up, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. Someone believed in her dream before it even had walls. That night, she whispered to her unborn child, You won't grow up in survival. You'll grow up in something we built. And when she closed her eyes, she saw a storefront, morning light streaming in, and her name on the glass. Jamie's table. The contractions started just after midnight. They were faint at first, like a warning, then sharper, then unstoppable. By 3 a.m., Hannah was on the floor of her attic room, gripping the bedpost, sweat pouring, breath ragged. Rosa knelt behind her, calm and steady, with towels, boiled water, and a voice like a drumbeat. "You're not alone," she said, "not tonight." By the time the first cry broke through the early dawn, the world had changed. Hannah sobbed, not from pain, but relief. Rosa placed the baby in her arms, swaddled and warm. "It's a boy," she whispered, strong lungs, big eyes. Hannah looked down at the tiny face pressed against her chest. "Jamie," she breathed. "Your name is Jamie." Later, Rosa scribbled into the back of her recipe book. "Today, Hannah gave birth to a boy made from courage and risen in fire. Jamie, the softest loaf life has ever baked." 3 months after Jamie was born, Hannah opened her first bakery. There was no grand sign, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no reporters snapping photos, just a small wooden house on the corner of Maple Street and an alley that led to the old parking lot, a space that used to be a dusty sewing machine repair shop. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked, the floors sloped slightly, and to Hannah, it was perfect. "What are you going to name it?" Rosa asked as they stood in the middle of the stripped-down space. Light streaming through dusty windows. Hannah held Jamie in her arms, the baby warm against her neck, his soft hair damp with sleep. She looked at him, then at the front glass, and the name rose in her mind like a fresh loaf rising in a warm oven. Jamie's table, a place where everything begins. She wasn't just opening a bakery. She was building a space to live. A table, a corner for people who had once been rejected, a shelter for single moms, school dropouts, kids who came with too many questions and no one willing to answer them. She wrote in her journal, "Every loaf is a second chance. Every sweet thing is a soft place to land. And every guest will be met with an open door, the very thing I once didn't have." The seed money came from Rosa. Hannah added a small business loan she'd qualified for after weeks of studying business plans and practicing her pitch. She learned about sourcing, rent contracts, building inspections. Rosa helped her find staff, a teenage apprentice who could also babysit Jamie when needed, a nursing student who worked weekends, and a new single mom who was learning to bake bread just like Hannah had once learned. No one was perfect, but everyone needed a start. On opening day, Jamie was 4 months old, asleep on a worn sofa in the corner. Hannah wore a cream-colored apron, her hair in a bun, sleeves rolled up, hands still dusted with flour, and eyes shining. A girl entered first, blonde hair tangled, eyes tired. "Do you have anything not too sweet?" she asked shyly. Hannah pointed to the chalkboard sign that read, "Sweet enough for healing, not too sweet for hiding." The girl laughed, a little. Customers returned. They came for the food, but they stayed for Hannah, for the way she remembered names, for how she quietly placed warm bread in hands that trembled, for how she made space, not just on tables, but in hearts. Every table had fresh flowers, and a little sign that said, "You are welcome here, whatever you carry." One afternoon, Rosa walked in after closing and placed a small wooden box on the counter. "This is for you." Inside, her worn recipe notebook. On the first page, a new line in purple ink. Jamie's Table, Chapter 2. That evening, as Hannah turned off the lights, wiped down the counters, and picked up her sleeping son, she looked around at the room she'd built with flour, fire, and faith. There were no trophies, no spotlights, just a mother who had once been shut out, now holding the keys to a place she opened every single morning. 3 months after opening, Jamie's Table had more than a few regulars. Students ordered birthday cupcakes. Teachers picked up cinnamon loaves for graduation parties. The police chief came by every Wednesday for his sourdough. Even Mrs. Marty, the same woman who once called Hannah a ruined girl, now messaged her for her brownie recipe. Sometimes, victories didn't come with apologies. They came in the form of a line out the door. under a sign that bore your name. Hannah spent her Mondays testing new recipes, updating her social media, and teaching new hires how to fold napkins like swans. She set one rule for everyone who worked there. You don't have to hide your past. But you do have to take responsibility for your future. People started calling Jamie's table a healing place. Women came not just for work, but for community. One apprentice started getting catering clients. Another mother, who once nearly gave up her pregnancy, now made milk bread every morning with gentle hands. When Jamie turned 1, Hannah opened a second location in a nearby town, the same one where the high school had refused to let her re-enroll years before. She didn't ask for permission. She just sent a box of pastries to the school's staff room with a note that read, "Thanks for closing the door. It taught me how to build my own." She enrolled in online courses, learned bookkeeping, negotiated better ingredient contracts. She hired a design student to revamp the brand identity. A new logo, a simple wooden table with a warm loaf and a child's hand reaching toward it. A new tagline, risen from scratch. One day, a journalist requested an interview for a regional food feature. Hannah declined photos in fancy dresses. Instead, she invited the reporter into the bakery. Hands deep in dough, apron covered in flour, hair tied back. When asked, "What's the secret to your success?" she paused, then said, "No one expected anything from me anymore. So I got to rewrite the ending." In the second year, Jamie's Table became a micro-chain with 3 locations, 10 full-time staff, and an in-house program called From Scratch, training women who had dropped out of school, survived abuse, or just needed a safe second start. One quiet evening, Hannah stood behind the counter, wiping down an empty table, when a girl walked in. Young, thin, pale, shaking. "Do you have anything left?" the girl asked. I got kicked out tonight." Hannah looked at her, remembering, not in pity, but in recognition. She reached under the counter, pulled out a warm buttered roll, poured hot tea, and slid it across the table. "Sit," she said gently. "This is Jamie's table, and tonight, if you need, you can stay and help mop the floor." The message came at 6:12 a.m., just as Hannah was folding napkins in the bakery's back kitchen, prepping for a Baking for Anxious Kids workshop. Her phone buzzed nonstop in the pocket of her apron. She ignored it until class was over. Then, wiping her hands, she opened the notification. "Outgoing mail, Hannah. I know you're busy, but you've been nominated for the Midwest Women of Impact Awards. Chloe," her young graphic designer, followed by a row of fire and teary-eyed emojis. Hannah nearly dropped the stack of linens. She blinked and scrolled to the link Chloe had attached. The page loaded slowly, and there it was. Nominee, Hannah Rivers, founder of Jamie's Table and the From Scratch initiative, which has supported over 40 women in rebuilding their lives through baking and skills training. 3 days later, an official email arrived. An invitation to attend the Midwest Women of Impact Gala, hosted in the city 3 hours from Stonefield. The kind of event where women wore tailored suits and headlines followed them into the room. Hannah reread the email twice, hand pressed to her chest. Not because she doubted it, but because her heartbeat had forgotten what this kind of hope felt like. At the gala, Hannah wore a linen dress in soft cream. No glitter, no heels, just earrings Rosa had once given her on the day she opened her first store. She brought with her a small cinnamon bun in a box, a symbolic thank you to the woman who'd handed her a second beginning when the world had handed her nothing. Her name was read last, under the final and most meaningful category, Woman of Enduring Social Impact. No one clapped louder than the 3 women from Jamie's Table seated in the 3rd row. They called themselves Team Rising Dough. Hannah stepped onto the stage. No script, no cue cards. She looked out at the crowd, hundreds of eyes staring at her, and thought only of one girl. Once left on a curb with no one to call and nothing but a suitcase. She spoke clearly, voice steady. "I was thrown out of my home, my school, my town, not for committing a crime, but for choosing to keep a child the world didn't approve of. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to show you that when the world shuts its doors, you can build your own. And if you hold on long enough, you'll set a table for others to sit at too." The audience rose to their feet. Not for her pain, but for what she made from it. Driving back to Stonefield the next morning, Hannah pulled into the lot behind the original bakery. Jamie was waiting at the front door, sketchpad in hand, his eyes lighting up as she stepped out of the car. "Did you bring me anything?" he asked. She smiled and held up a small crystal trophy in the shape of a loaf of bread. "This one's not edible," she said, "but it reminds me that impossible things can rise." Jamie hugged her tight. Across the street, the sign for Jamie's table shimmered in the morning light. A lighthouse born from the darkness. Her phone vibrated. "Outgoing mail, Hannah? I don't even know where to start. Dad's under investigation for embezzling community funds. Mom hasn't eaten in days. The house is being repossessed. I'm sorry to text you like this. They say they need you. Rachel." Hannah read it 3 times. There was no, "We're sorry." No, "We were wrong." Only one thing was clear. They needed her. 3 hours later, Hannah drove toward Stonefield. The town hall building was plastered with posters demanding financial transparency and "Stop using our donations for vanity." Paul Rivers' name had been removed from the committee directory. His final speech online was now filled with public comments like, "Built on pride." Crumbled by truth, Hannah didn't go to her old house. She texted Rachel to meet her at a small cafe near the center of town, a place where people would see them. She didn't want to hide. Not anymore. Rachel arrived late. Her hair was messy, sweater wrinkled, face pale and exhausted. She stopped when she saw Hannah. Like she wasn't sure she was allowed to sit across from the sister who had once been cast out. "Thanks for coming," Rachel whispered. I didn't know who else to call. Not many choices left, I imagine," Hannah said quietly. Rachel stared down at her drink. "Dad can't show his face. Mom barely speaks. They're begging you to help. Pay off the mortgage. Buy back the house. Save what's left of the family name." Hannah gave a short laugh. "The family name? You talk like that's something that was ever given to me." Rachel swallowed. "You loved Mom once. You trusted her." Hannah looked out the window. She remembered her mother standing behind Paul that night. Not shouting, not hitting, just doing nothing. After a pause, Hannah spoke. "You're right. I won't help them for their sake. But Jamie will one day ask about his grandparents. And I don't want the story to end with a foreclosure." 1 week later, Hannah bought her childhood home at a public auction. She didn't change the locks. She didn't tear it down. She simply left a letter on the kitchen table. "The one you rejected now holds the deed. Mom and Rachel can stay. Dad must go. This isn't punishment. It's justice." When her mother read the letter, she didn't cry loudly, just quietly. The way someone weeps after years of silence, when regret finally finds its voice. The rain fell gently that day, as if the sky was trying to forgive something. Jamie sat in the back seat, legs swinging. "Where are we going, Mom?" Hannah kept her eyes on the road. "To a house I used to live in." Jamie thought for a second. "Does Grandma live there?" "She does. Can I call her Grandma?" Hannah smiled faintly. "If you want to." Jamie nodded. "If she has cookies, maybe." Miriam Rivers opened the door before they knocked. She looked older, softer, smaller. "Hi, Mom," Hannah said calmly. Jamie peeked from behind her. "I'm Jamie." Miriam's voice cracked. "I have cookies." Jamie looked at his mom, got the nod he needed, and stepped forward. Hannah stayed at the doorway, watching. Her son, sitting on the couch that once echoed with silence and shame, now laughed. Crumbs on his shirt, dominoes on the floor. No more ghosts, only living. That night, as Jamie slept, Hannah opened her journal for the final entry. "I walked back through the door that once closed behind me. But this time, I held the key. Not to stay, not to ask, but to choose." She looked around the house she'd built, not from bricks or boards, but from batter, fire, and a will no one could strip away. Outside, the Jamie's table sign glowed under the soft streetlight. And inside, a mother and her son rested. Not because they were finished, but because they were home.